Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior corporate leader with a deep understanding and experience of human resources and AI. From Washington, D.C., Kellee Franklin. Kellee, welcome to the show.
Very nice to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Kellee is a member of the Board of Advisors of the Global Innovation Institute, which has a proven history of spearheading organizational transformation by harnessing the power of creative people-centric approaches and a deep understanding of emerging technologies, including AI. She's also a senior innovation advisor, a product ambassador, and an AI strategy enablement, MOTIS. Kellee, before we get into discussions about all the areas of your specialization, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what got you interested in the areas that you work in.
Great question. So I started actually my journey, I thought I was going to get into clinical psychology.
Wow.
And so my background is rooted in psychology and understanding organizational behavior. But I found out pretty quickly after a stint with the Institute of Psychiatry that that was not my avenue. Fortunately, I had a father who worked in organization development, so I was familiar with how to apply psychology within the realms of organizational structures. And so that was an area that interested me because I knew that you could apply psychology, but within larger systems.
Yeah.
And so I pursued advanced degree, not only the master's degree, but then continued on for my doctoral studies. Got pursued by a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, which your audience may be familiar with.
Absolutely.
Working in the defense and intelligence space. And as a young professional, a little naive, I didn't really realize how advantageous that exposure to that community would be. But you probably well know that being within that community, I was exposed at a very early professional age to things like data visualization, AR, VR, design thinking, things that are now more commonplace. I was sort of embedded in that very early on. So it became kind of just part of what I knew and understood how organizations work and what moved them forward in transformation. So I worked for 7 years in the Washington, D.C. area from the highest levels of our U.S. government, working with various high-profile corporations that supported defense and intelligence space. After 7 years, I was asked by Booz Allen to go out and start our Seattle office. And after that, I was really getting more and more curious about consciousness and mindfulness, which I think might be something of interest to your audience. And that wasn't something at the time that Booz Allen had any interest in. And so it was time for me to launch my own practice. And so I was able to get involved with things called Wisdom 2.0, which again, Facebook, Google, and some other big name companies were involved and engaged in, but how to use contemplative and reflective practices really to be more thoughtful leaders. And so I've been running my own practice up until the time I left Booz Allen, doing much of the same type of work, but I think even expanding it to what I would think greater horizons. And now we find ourselves in what I call the AI avalanche.
Absolutely. What an amazing journey. Thank you for sharing this, Kellee. So let's now talk a little bit about people-centric approaches. My first question for you is, what are some of the key elements of a successful people-centric management strategy?
I think at the root of any people-centric approach is you have to have high levels of empathy for not only the people that you are working in service of, but in the solutions that you're designing. And secondly is diversity. Am I assembling a diverse team of people and practitioners who can look at the challenge or solution we're designing and diversity in also the solutions that we're designing and developing.
Mhm.
And I actually have put together, based on my years of experience of working with very diverse clients,
Mhm.
a very simple three-phased approach that I think has helped organizations be very innovative and transformative. And it's simply engage, educate, and empower. So how do you engage people within the system that you're trying to help? How do you educate them? By giving them data, information, exposing them to different ways of working? And then how do you ultimately hand over the keys of the car to them? Because we are basically in service of them. And I think historically, where consultants have made mistakes is they go into systems thinking that they're there to put their ideas or their solutions and push those onto a system. And really, we are interveners in systems. The system exists before us, it's going to exist after us,
Absolutely.
and that we are just visitors.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we are not so sensitive to that.
Well said. And what would you say are some of the biggest challenges in aligning business, digital, and technology capabilities while retaining a people-centric approach?
Yeah, I would say probably cultivating a supportive and adaptive organizational culture. I think it has less to do with the technology and more to do, obviously, with the people. How do you include fostering a mindset, the change that happens between the years, that embraces change and promotes continuous learning and encourages innovation? A quote that I love, and it's from the co-founder of the Intel Corporation, is a leader is a dealer in faith. And I love that, because if you think about the work that we do, we go into organizational systems and we're asking people to go from point A to point B. And oftentimes that pathway is really not very clear. And our job, whether it's a consultant or whether a leader inside of an organization, is to help them make that leap. And that's emotional. That's not technical. And as this wise leader said, if you don't connect people's heads with their hearts, their feet don't walk.
Absolutely.
And to me, that's sort of the essence of change management that often gets left out of those fancy change management frameworks and models. But I think that is the most difficult thing with digital transformation, AI adoption, or anything, is building a culture that's going to support and help navigate people through these changes and transformations.
What a great response. Thank you. And what role does mindfulness play in organizational transformation? And how can a leader integrate this into their strength?
Well, I love this question, of course. We are living in a time where change is rapid and constant. And I think what better way to show leadership than to slow down?
Right.
We think of that in order to be an effective leader, we need to be reactive. And mindfulness teaches us practices where we can be more proactive and reflective. And so for me, mindfulness really is a much more innovative way of being in the world, because I think it can help you be more diligent about the decisions that you're making and being more thoughtful about the data that is presented in front of you. And you can be more artful in the questions that you're asking. When we aren't integrating mindful practices, we sometimes are making knee-jerk reactions, aren't being fully thoughtful about the data that's presented in front of us, aren't seeing the whole picture. We're just looking at snapshots. And so how we can embed this is how we can embed any type of learning practice, I think,
Right.
is that it has to be horizontal and vertical.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is what I see happening, sadly, in most organizational systems is that we're getting content pushes and we're calling that learning.
Mm.
Learning happens with adults if it is embedded not only in practices that run horizontal within an organization, but also vertical.
Mm.
So it can't just be a one-stop shop thing. It has to be integrated and not only from the onboarding, but in the daily practices, all the way through the exit strategies that you have for an employee and everywhere along the employee experience.
Well said. So let's now talk a little bit about emerging technologies and AI when it comes to organizational structures, workflows, and people. How do you see AI transforming organizational structures and workflows?
Well, we already see a lot of that happening, right?
Absolutely.
We see a lot of automation.
Yeah.
We see the ability for AI to take massive amounts of data and aggregate that to present the ability for us to see trends and analysis. We see even at a very informal perspective, employees able to use AI to, even on a Zoom conversation, to use it to summarize meeting notes.
Right.
So we see it in all forms and fashions. I don't know if it's being very well thought through and planned, which to some degree, I think that's good. I think that in some organizational systems, there's a large fear factor. So I think the play aspect, letting people be informal about AI is great.
Right.
Letting them play with things like PIAI to ask questions and to have it formulate ideas and to help create like instructional design or meeting notes or what have you. Where I get more concerned is when we, again, making those knee-jerk reactions and say, oh, we can just automate that.
Right.
Without consideration to your earlier question for the people that could potentially be impacting.
Right. Right.
And I see that happening in organizations to catastrophic impact to what I often say is human systems. You know, we work and we live within organizations comprised of humans.
Absolutely.
And I think that even it's just like collecting data. Just because we can collect it doesn't mean we should. And with AI, just because we can apply AI doesn't mean we should. And I think right now we are finding ourselves in super excitement mode. We should put AI to that. And I think we need back to the mindfulness, be more thoughtful in our decision making.
Well said. And, you know, I'd also like to get your perspective on what are some common misconceptions about AI, because suddenly everyone seems to be talking AI and AI seems to have the answer to all our problems and all our evils. So what are your perspectives on what are some common misconceptions that need to be handled?
I think the massive misconception is that AI is going to solve all our problems. You said it.
Yes.
It's not here to solve all our problems. It's in my hopes and desires for AI. AI has been around a long time. A lot of people think it's a new thing.
Yeah.
It's been around for at least a century.
Correct.
So people need to know that. It's not a new development. You've been using AI, whether you know it or not. So that's another misconception. And AI can make life more simple and get rid of administrative burdens. And my hope and desire is that that does get us closer to a more people-centric organization. Again, sadly, what I'm seeing, much like back I have enough wisdom in my hair to tell you, I remember when email was integrated into the workplace.
Mm.
And the same is true with AI. I see that the integration of AI is creating a greater distance between people.
Mm.
So if we integrate a process within, let's say, HR, the people who work within HR become more distant to the people they're serving.
Mm.
I don't think that's the intention of AI.
Mm.
The intention of AI is to lift some of the administrative burden
Mm.
so that those HR professionals can be out doing more face-to-face, in-person conversations.
Mm.
I'm not so sure we're seeing that happen.
Right, right.
So my hope is that we get there.
Mm.
And I think that that's gonna be this. When I think of the future of work, that's what I think of the future of work.
Mm.
Let's let AI take the heavy lift of some of these, things that have been administratively burdensome to us,
Mm-hmm.
that cause the burnout, cause all of these things that are having people stressed out at work.
Mm.
And let's get back to the humanness in the workplace.
Well said. And what would you say are some of the ethical considerations that should be taken into account when integrating AI into organizational processes?
Well, ethics, as you know, is a huge topic of conversation
Yeah.
in the world of AI. And so AI in the right hands is a beautiful thing.
Mm.
But AI is a powerful tool. And if it's in the hands of bad actors, it can be used to do things that aren't so good
Mm.
for our organizational systems and society at large.
Right.
So I do think that it calls on all of us. It's not going to be an AI department.
Mm.
It requires all of us to some level. Doesn't mean you need to be an AI expert,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires all of us to have a level of knowledge and understanding of AI.
Right.
And the ethical considerations are vast because AI can be used to change data, morph data.
Mm.
And this goes back to your earlier question about mindfulness.
Mm.
You can't always believe what's in front of you.
Correct.
You always have to be discerning and questioning and asking thoughtful questions. And my concern is, much like many of my colleagues who are in this space, are worried that, oh, if we just automate it, or if we just do AI, that leaders are just going to make the assumption that what is presented in front of them is reality.
Mm.
And as you and I know you've got a very wonderful data background. Data doesn't tell us all of the story.
Mm.
And that's why it's so important for us to make sure that we're getting out and we're talking to people. Data is just part of the story.
Correct.
I can't tell you how many times I have conducted research, whether it's been at an academic level or whether it's been in a consulting engagement where I've done a survey or questionnaire. I get the data back and I'm like, oh, well, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Then I follow it up with qualitative questions. I go out and I talk to people, totally different responses.
Mm.
So we really have to be more thoughtful, mindful leaders moving forward, and not just ourselves automated.
Mm.
And that's my biggest concern related to AI and ethics.
Well said. Well said. So, Kellee, let's now move to another topic of conversation, which is leadership and collaboration. And you also coach leaders. So, my first question is, how do you coach leaders to effectively communicate transformation goals to their teams?
Well, I think kind of going back to one of your very first questions, I think teaching them about what it means to what we know about people and performance. I mean, there's just fundamental things around psychology, around adult learning that we know to be true about people and performance. And I think once they know the scientific backing to what that is, that helps them think differently about how they lead and lead into leadership. I think sometimes, and again, I've taught for many, many years in MBA programs, so not to be critical of those programs, but oftentimes I teach the more advanced level program courses, and my students come to me very well versed in analytics, decision making, how to do financial modeling. They've received little, if anything, on people development. And I find that interesting.
Yeah.
MBA students, right? So why should we expect when we go into our human systems, organizational systems, that we have leaders who are managing any differently? So I think it does require us as coaches to help them understand the psychology behind what it means to be human. And I think that's one of the first cornerstones. And, you know, these leaders are smart people. Once they get that, and then also exposing them to that innovation transformation model that's very simple.
Yeah.
I've spoken on this around the world, that engage, educate, and empower, because really as a leader, you can't do it all by yourself. And if you expect to move organizational systems by yourself, that's one of the major flaws that I find with leaders that fail, is they think, oh, I can do all of this. You've got to assemble the momentum. So to me, it's less about managing change. It's about building momentum for change. And if you understand that engage, educate, and empower, and bringing people along with you is so key and so important. And of course, I think fundamental to all of the work that we do, whether it's working with senior level executives to people who are down on the front line, is listening, right? Listening, understanding what they're dealing with, and understanding the root challenges that they are confronting and helping them navigate through those things, I think is so fundamentally important.
Well said. So Kellee, I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is on challenges leaders face in transformation. And most of us as humans don't like transformation. We like status quo or status quo ante. So what are some of the challenges, in your view, leaders face when implementing digital transformation?
Yeah. Well, let me just preface my answer with this. No innovation happens without change. So if you want to be an innovative company, corporation leader, you have to be willing to change.
Correct.
Right. And so I think one of the biggest challenges that any of us have is the person that we look at when we're brushing our teeth in the morning. So I think it is important as a leader that we surround ourselves with supporters. And supporters, I don't mean are yes men, yes women, right? But people who can reflect back and help us. And because again, it goes back to a response that I said earlier to you. What I have found to be the biggest barrier to change and transformation is not anything technical. The technical stuff, for the most part, is the easy stuff.
Right.
It's the cultural or the mind shift that we have to have. And we have to have a great supportive team that's going to reflect back, hey, you seem like you're stuck. How can we help you move through that? And that is, I mean, that is so fundamental, I think, to whether it's a personal change, transformation, or whether it's in the business context. So critically important.
Well said. And my last question to you, Kellee, you know, right in the beginning of our conversation, I asked you about the two elements or the elements of a successful people-centric leader, and you said empathy and diversity.
Mm.
So therefore, my question is, how can a leader ensure that their transformation strategies are inclusive and consider diverse perspectives?
Mm. Yeah, that's I think that again, kind of one of our challenges, right? Because we tend to lead like we like to be led,
Mhm.
and we tend to surround ourselves with people that bring us a high degree of comfort.
Yeah.
Right. So it can be challenging to do that.
Mm.
But I can tell you, one of the women that I have the good fortune of coaching, a great executive for a large technical corporation that all of us on this audience would know the name of.
Mm.
Um, she works in product development. She's a strategist, but she works in product development.
Mm.
And she said, when she looks around the table, she's like, this doesn't really seem diverse. I'm the only female. And, and again, surface level, I don't really think necessarily equals diverse or not diverse. I love the quote by Malcolm Forbes, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Diversity, the art of thinking independently together.
Wow.
So I'll
That's
say
very
that
cool.
again.
Yeah.
The diversity, the art of thinking independently together.
Amazing.
Because I know at least in the United States, we sort of
Mm.
have made what I would consider an error in thinking that just because everyone around the table looks the same,
Yeah.
that they think the same. And I don't think that's true. But I do think that we need to look past the surface,
Mm.
again, back to my psychology background, and understand. And the good work that I'm doing with Modus One AI now, we do that. We do personality assessments to look at the neurodiversity behind the storefront. And we also do a cultural assessment based on 8 core pillars that we have found globally, whether you're in India, whether you're in the United States, or whether you're in Europe, tend to support an innovative culture.
Right.
And we're able, through that personality assessment and that cultural assessment, help to create a more, I think, supportive, not only employee experience, but an organizational culture that allows people to thrive in a diverse environment. But I can tell you from my teaching, and I want to make sure your audience knows this. I teach up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States, and I always run the demographics. It's an international business school, and the average class composition is 38 nationalities.
Wow.
How amazing is that? And I can tell you that the culture that we create in that classroom experience is pretty amazing. And the outputs that these graduate students produce is phenomenal.
Mm.
So I leave that with you and your audience, because diversity really is a differentiator, along with creating that container, that culture that holds that, and that really unifies us. What are the similarities rather than the differences? And I think we've focused maybe a little too much on the differences rather than what can unite us towards a shared goal and a shared purpose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kellee, on that note, and your amazing definition of diversity, which is the art of thinking independently together, and I think that's something all of us should remember. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me at such length about people-centric approaches in organizations. Thank you for talking to me about emerging technologies and AI. And you obviously have so much depth of knowledge. We didn't get a chance to go into much more detail on AI, but maybe in a few months, I'll ask you to do another conversation with me focused entirely on AI and organization structures. And thank you for speaking to me about leadership, collaboration, and coaching. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.